The morning sun cast long shadows through the tall windows of Springfield County Courthouse, illuminating dust particles that danced in the air like tiny witnesses to history. Outside, the scene was chaotic. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like metallic flowers seeking sunlight. Reporters clutched coffee cups and microphones, rehearsing their opening lines. Protesters held signs high, some reading "Save" in bold red letters, others declaring justice for heroes. Camera crews jostled for position on the courthouse steps, everyone wanting the perfect shot of what promised to be the most talked-about hearing of the year. Inside, the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The courtroom, built in the classical style with dark wood paneling and brass fixtures, had never seen such attention. Every seat in the gallery was occupied, with dozens more standing along the back wall. Security guards stood at attention near every exit, their expressions serious and alert. This wasn't a typical Tuesday morning proceeding. This was the case that had divided a community, sparked a national conversation, and brought a small town in Massachusetts into the spotlight. Maria sat in the front row of the gallery, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She wore her best navy dress, the one she'd bought for her sister's wedding 2 years ago, and her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun. But despite her put-together appearance, the strain showed in the lines around her eyes and the way she kept glancing at the courthouse doors. Beside her sat her husband, a construction worker with calloused hands and a strong jaw that was currently clenched with tension. He placed his hand over Maria's, giving it a gentle squeeze. "She'll be okay," he whispered, though his own voice betrayed his nervousness. Between them sat the reason for all this attention, 3-year-old Emma, small and delicate, her legs swinging above the floor since they couldn't quite reach it when she sat in the adult-sized chair. She wore a bright yellow dress with tiny white flowers embroidered along the hem, her favorite, the one she always insisted on wearing to special occasions. In her arms, she clutched Mr. Hoppy, a stuffed gray rabbit with one ear slightly torn from countless nights of comfort. Emma's wide brown eyes darted around the enormous room, taking in sights that most children her age would never experience. "Mama, why are there so many people?" Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible over the murmur of conversations filling the space. Maria bent down, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "Remember what we talked about. We're here to help. All these people want to help him too." At the mention of his name, Emma's face brightened slightly, though confusion still clouded her features. "When can I see? Is he here?" And Maria exchanged a glance heavy with unspoken worry. How could they explain to a 3-year-old that the dog who saved her life, her friend, her protector, might not be coming home? How could they make her understand words like, or departmental protocol, when they barely understood the injustice of it themselves? The courtroom continued to fill. In the third row sat Officer Jake, wearing his dress uniform, the medals on his chest catching the light. His face was drawn, aged by stress and sleepless nights. Beside him sat his wife Sarah and their 2 teenage sons, all 3 wearing matching expressions of grim determination. Jake's hands rested on his knees, but his fingers tapped an anxious rhythm that betrayed the calm exterior he tried to maintain. 8 years. 8 years he'd worked alongside, trusted him with his life, and now bureaucracy threatened to take away the best partner he'd ever had. Behind the family, a group of community members held small photographs, pictures of at school visits, at the police department's open house, demonstrating his skills at the county fair. These were people whose lives had been touched by a dog who, to them, represented everything good about law enforcement: dedication, bravery, and protection. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman whose grandson had helped find when the boy wandered away from a picnic, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. Michael, a teenager whose life had saved during a drug bust gone wrong, sat with his arms crossed, anger simmering just beneath the surface at the thought of what might happen today. On the opposite side of the courtroom, representatives from the police department sat in stiff silence. Chief Robert, a man with silver hair and a stern expression carved from 30 years of difficult decisions, stared straight ahead. Next to him, the department's legal team shuffled papers and prepared their arguments. They weren't here to celebrate heroism. They were here to defend protocol, to uphold regulations that existed for good reasons, even when those reasons felt heartless in specific circumstances. The press section was a frenzy of activity. Journalists from local stations sat beside reporters from national outlets. This story had everything: a child in danger, a heroic rescue, and now a trial that questioned whether doing the right thing was enough when rules said otherwise. Social media had exploded with opinions. Save had trended nationwide. Think pieces debated the balance between public safety regulations and common sense. Everyone had an opinion, and everyone wanted to see how this would end. The heavy oak doors at the side of the courtroom opened with a groan. "All rise," the bailiff commanded, his voice booming through the space. The rustling of clothing and shuffling of feet created a wave of sound as everyone stood in unison. Judge entered, her black robe flowing behind her like a shadow. She was in her mid-50s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and a reputation for fairness that was legendary in the county. She'd presided over murders, corporate fraud cases, and custody battles, but nothing quite like this. Judge took her seat at the bench, the elevated position giving her a clear view of everyone in her courtroom. She surveyed the scene before her, the packed gallery, the cameras, the little girl in the yellow dress clutching a stuffed rabbit, and something flickered across her face. Was it sympathy, understanding, or simply the weight of the decision she would have to make? Emma tugged on her mother's sleeve as everyone sat down. "Mama, is that the judge lady, the one who decides about?" "Yes, baby, that's her." Emma studied Judge with the frank, unfiltered curiosity of a child. Then, before Maria could stop her, Emma waved. Just a small wave, her tiny hand opening and closing. A few people in the gallery chuckled softly. Judge's expression softened for just a moment, barely noticeable, but there, before her professional mask returned. The bailiff read the case number and description, his voice formal and detached. "In the matter of K9 unit, badge number 447, regarding use of force incident dated April 3, 2025. The words reduced a life-or-death situation, a child's rescue, and a hero's fate to sterile legal terminology. Judge lifted her gavel. "Before we begin," she said, her voice carrying authority that silenced even the whispers, "I want to make something clear. This courtroom will maintain order and respect throughout these proceedings. I understand emotions are high, but disruptions will not be tolerated." Her eyes swept the room, making contact with protesters, press, and family alike. This case involves serious questions about public safety, animal behavior, and law enforcement protocol. It also involves a child's life and a dedicated service animal's future. We will treat it with the gravity it deserves. The gavel struck wood with a sharp crack that made Emma jump slightly in her seat. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a starting gun. "Let's begin," Judge announced. And with those two words, the fate of a hero hung in the balance. A little girl clutched her rabbit, and an entire community held its breath. The cameras rolled, capturing every moment. The reporters' pens flew across notebooks. And in a kennel somewhere across town, a German shepherd with a graying muzzle waited, unaware that his entire future would be decided in a room he'd never seen, by people he'd never met, while the one person who mattered most, a 3-year-old girl whose life he'd saved, prepared to face the impossible task of saving him in return. The trial had begun. 6 months earlier, the house sat quiet under a blanket of stars on Maple Street, a peaceful suburban neighborhood where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. Children's bicycles lined driveways, American flags hung from porches, and motion sensor lights kept watch over tidy lawns. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and knew their neighbors by name. It was the last place anyone would expect a nightmare to unfold. Maria had fallen asleep around 10:30 that night, exhausted from a double shift at the hospital where she worked as a nurse, had crashed beside her an hour later, still wearing his work clothes, too tired to even change after a 14-hour construction job. Their small two-story house was silent except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator downstairs and the occasional creak of old wood settling. In her room down the hall, 3-year-old Emma slept peacefully, surrounded by stuffed animals and the soft glow of her butterfly. Mr. Hoppy lay tucked under her arm. Her dreams were simple and sweet, whatever 3-year-olds dream about. Rainbows, perhaps, ice cream, playing at the park with the neighborhood dogs. At 2:47 a.m., everything changed. The sound of shattering glass exploded through the quiet house like a gunshot. Maria's eyes snapped open, her heart immediately hammering against her ribs. For one disoriented moment, she thought she'd dreamed it. Then she heard it, footsteps downstairs, heavy and deliberate, the crunch of glass under boots. She hissed, shaking her husband awake. Someone's in the house. Bolted upright, sleep vanishing instantly. His construction worker instincts kicked in, assess, act, protect. "Stay here," he whispered, reaching for the baseball bat he kept beside the bed. "Call 911. But Maria's mind had gone to one place only, Emma. Her daughter's room was downstairs, a decision they'd made because the upstairs bathroom was being renovated. It had seemed convenient at the time. Now it felt like the worst mistake of their lives. Maria didn't stay put. She couldn't. While moved toward the stairs with his bat, Maria grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers as she followed her husband. Her bare feet moved silently across the hardwood floor. She could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, so loud she was certain the intruder could hear it too. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice was calm, professional. Someone broke into our house, Maria whispered urgently. My baby, my daughter is downstairs. Please send someone now. 247 Maple Street. Had reached the top of the stairs. What he saw below froze him in place. A man in dark clothing and a ski mask stood in their living room, a crowbar in one hand. The bay window was shattered, glittering shards spread across the carpet. The intruder was grabbing electronics, the television, Maria's laptop from the coffee table, shoving them into a duffel bag. But that wasn't what made blood turn to ice. Emma's door was open. It had been closed when they went to bed. Emma, Maria screamed, abandoning all caution. She pushed past and flew down the stairs. The intruder spun around, startled. In that same moment, Emma appeared in her doorway, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. She'd been awakened by the noise, curious about the sounds like any child might be. She stood there in her pink pajamas with the unicorns on them, her hair mussed from sleep, completely unaware of the danger. Everything happened in seconds, but to Maria, it felt like slow motion, each moment stretching into eternity. The intruder saw Emma. He saw on the stairs with the bat. He saw Maria charging toward her daughter, and he made a decision born of panic and desperation. In 3 quick strides, he reached Emma. The little girl didn't even have time to cry out before he grabbed her, his rough hand covering her mouth. Emma's eyes went wide with terror, her small body struggling against the man's grip. "Back off," the intruder shouted, his voice rough and frantic. "Back off or I swear." He pulled out a knife, pressing it close enough to Emma that Maria felt her knees buckle. "Please," Maria begged, her hands raised. "Please don't hurt her. Take whatever you want. Take everything, just don't hurt my baby." Had stopped mid-stairs, the bat hanging useless at his side. What could he do? One wrong move and that knife he couldn't even finish the thought. Emma was crying now, tears streaming down her face, her small hands reaching toward her mother. "Mama," she whimpered behind the intruder's hand. "Mama." The intruder backed toward the shattered window, dragging Emma with him. He was trapped and he knew it. The sirens were already audible in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. But that just made him more dangerous, more unpredictable. "I'm sorry," he kept saying, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, I didn't know there was a kid. I'm sorry." But sorry didn't stop him from holding that knife. Sorry didn't stop him from using a child as a human shield. Maria could see her daughter's face, see the pure terror in those innocent brown eyes, and something inside her shattered more completely than that window ever could. She'd brought Emma into this world, protected her, nursed her through fevers, kissed every scraped knee. And now she could do nothing but watch as a stranger held a blade near her baby's throat. The sirens grew deafening. Red and blue lights began flashing through the broken window, painting the walls in alternating colors. The intruder's head whipped toward the light, his grip on Emma tightening. "Stay back," he screamed at the approaching police. "I've got a kid, I've got a hostage." Outside, Officer Jake pulled up in his patrol car, his K-9 partner alert in the back. Jake had been on duty for 6 hours, responding to the usual calls: a noise complaint, a fender bender, a shoplifter at the 24-hour convenience store. This was supposed to be a routine burglary call. The 911 dispatcher had said possible home invasion, suspects possibly still on scene. But when Jake heard hostage situation and child in danger crackle through his radio, routine went out the window. "Control, this is Unit 12, Jake spoke into his radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline now pumping through his veins. "I'm on scene. Confirm child hostage." "Affirmative, Unit 12, 3-year-old female. Suspect is armed with a knife and using the child as a shield. Backup is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. In a situation like this, 3 minutes might as well be 3 hours. Jake looked back at who was already alert, sensing his partner's tension. The German shepherd's ears were perked forward, his intelligent eyes locked on Jake's face, waiting for commands. They'd trained for scenarios like this: active threats, hostage situations, armed suspects. But training was different from reality, especially when the hostage was a toddler. "Heel," Jake commanded, clipping the lead to the dog's collar. They exited the vehicle together, moving with practiced precision toward the house. Through the shattered window, Jake could see the scene: the terrified parents, the man in the mask, and the tiny girl in his arms. Emma's face was red from crying, her small body trembling. The intruder was backing toward the broken window, clearly planning to escape through the same way he'd entered. "Police, let the child go." Jake shouted, his weapon drawn but pointed down. He couldn't risk a shot, not with Emma so close. "Stay back," the intruder screamed again. His hand was shaking, the knife wavering dangerously close to Emma. "I'll run. I swear I'll run with her." His body was tense beside Jake, every muscle coiled and ready. The dog had been trained to read situations, to understand threats, to protect. And right now, every instinct in his highly trained body recognized what Jake recognized. This man was about to do something desperate. The intruder climbed through the window frame, glass crunching under his boots. Emma still held against his chest like a shield. In his panic and haste, his grip on the child loosened just slightly, just enough. That's when everything changed. The intruder stumbled on a piece of glass, and as he caught himself, the knife flashed in the police lights. To Maria, watching from inside, it looked like he was raising the weapon. To frozen in horror, it looked like a threat becoming real. To Officer, assessing the scene with 8 years of experience, it looked like an armed suspect about to flee with a hostage who might not survive the next 60 seconds. And to it looked like one thing only: a threat to an innocent child. Jake saw the shift in his body language a split second before it happened. The dog had made a decision. "Wait," Jake started to say, but was already moving. The German shepherd launched forward with the speed and power that had made him legendary in the K-9 unit. 75 pounds of trained protection instinct focused on one objective: save the child. His jaws clamped onto the intruder's arm, the arm holding the knife, with precision that came from hundreds of hours of training. The intruder screamed. The knife clattered to the ground, And most importantly, Emma fell free, tumbling onto the grass just outside the window. Maria burst through the front door, scooping her daughter into her arms before anyone else could move. Emma clutched her mother, sobbing into her neck, safe now, alive, unharmed except for the terror that would take months to fade. Behind them held on, his training keeping him focused even as the intruder struggled and screamed. Jake rushed forward, commanding, "Out." But the dog, in the chaos and adrenaline of the moment, held on 2 seconds longer than protocol dictated. 2 seconds that saved a child's life. 2 seconds that would later condemn a hero to death row. The morning after the rescue, Springfield woke up to a story that seemed straightforward. A heroic police dog had saved a toddler from a dangerous criminal. Local news station WSPF ran the headline, "K9 Hero Saves 3-Year-Old in Home Invasion," with footage of the house, the shattered window covered in plastic, and interviews with grateful neighbors. By noon, the story had spread beyond Springfield. Regional outlets picked it up. By evening, it was trending nationally. Maria stood in her living room, still wearing the same clothes from the night before, watching herself on television giving a tearful interview. "That dog saved my daughter's life," her TV image said, voice breaking with emotion. "Is a hero, an absolute hero." Stood beside the television version of his wife, his arm around her shoulders, nodding emphatically. Emma sat on the couch, eating cereal and watching cartoons, blissfully unaware that her face was being broadcast across the country. She'd already mostly forgotten the scary parts of last night, the way children sometimes mercifully do. What she remembered was the nice doggy who'd been there, and she kept asking when she could pet him. Officer Jake was fielding phone calls from reporters, interview requests, and congratulations from fellow officers. His captain had clapped him on the shoulder that morning. "Good work. That dog of yours is something special." Jake had smiled, proud of his partner, relieved the situation had ended with Emma safe. Was back at the K9 kennel, resting after the night's excitement, probably dreaming whatever heroic dogs dream about. Everything seemed perfect. Justice had been served, a child was safe, and a good dog was getting the recognition he deserved. Then the other shoe dropped. It started with a phone call to the police chief's office. The attorney representing the burglar, now identified as age 28, with a history of drug-related offenses, was threatening a lawsuit. Was in the hospital with severe injuries to his arm and shoulder. Doctors said he'd need multiple surgeries and might never regain full use of his right hand. Excessive force, argued in a press conference 2 days after the incident. "My client made a terrible mistake, yes, but that doesn't give law enforcement, or their animals, the right to maim him. The dog attacked well beyond what was necessary to subdue Mr." The press conference played on a loop. Stood outside the hospital, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his words carefully chosen. "We're not disputing that a crime occurred, but we're talking about permanent disability caused by an animal that's supposed to be under control. What happened to was not appropriate use of force. It was an attack." Chief Robert watched the press conference from his office, a headache forming behind his eyes. He'd been in law enforcement for 30 years and had seen enough to know that what looked simple rarely stayed that way. He picked up the phone and made a call he didn't want to make. "Jake, I need you to come in. Bring service records." That meeting changed everything. The police department had protocols, extensive detailed protocols about K9 use of force. These rules existed for good reasons: officer safety, public safety, liability protection. Every K9 unit had to follow strict engagement parameters. Dogs were supposed to bite and hold, not bite and maul. They were supposed to release on command immediately. Every action had to be justified, documented, defensible. Chief sat across from Jake in his office, file spread between them. "Walk me through it again," the chief said, his tone careful. "When exactly did you give the release command?" Jake's stomach tightened. "Sir, it happened fast. Engaged the suspect, the child fell free." When did you give the command, officer? Jake met his chief's eyes, approximately 2 seconds after engagement. And released. Within 4 seconds total, sir. The situation was chaotic. Emma was in danger. Did exactly what he was trained to. Chief held up his hand. I know what you're going to say. I know save that little girl. But protocol states immediate release upon command. 4 seconds is, he paused, choosing his words carefully, it's outside parameters. By 2 seconds, Jake couldn't keep the frustration from his voice. 2 seconds that made sure drop that knife and couldn't grab Emma again. 2 seconds that a lawyer is now arguing caused unnecessary injury. The chief rubbed his temples. Jake, you know I have to open an investigation. Internal Affairs wants a full review. The investigation was supposed to be routine, internal, quiet. But nothing stayed quiet in Springfield, especially not when attorneys and media were involved. Someone leaked the investigation to the press, probably's office, and suddenly the narrative began to shift. Police dog under investigation after violent attack ran one headline. Hero or hazard? Questions raised about K9 force proclaimed another. Opinion pieces began appearing. Some defended passionately. Others questioned whether police dogs were too dangerous, too unpredictable, too much of a liability in modern law enforcement. Social media exploded with debate. Videos of the aftermath began circulating, footage that hadn't been released initially, showing injuries in graphic detail. Blood on the grass. Paramedics working frantically. The images were disturbing and they complicated the narrative. The breaking point came when the Internal Affairs report was completed. Jake sat in Chief's office again, this time with the department's legal counsel present and a union representative at his side. The manila folder between them might as well have been a bomb. The findings are clear, the legal counsel, a woman named, said without preamble. Engagement exceeded acceptable use of force parameters. The delay in release, combined with the severity of the suspect's injuries, constitutes a violation of departmental K9 protocols. Jake felt his world tilting, but he saved a child's life. We're not disputing that, continued, her voice maddeningly calm. But the law doesn't work on moral victories. It works on precedent, protocol, and liability. If we defend this action, we're essentially saying our K9 units can determine their own engagement parameters. That opens the department to massive liability in every future incident. Chief looked like he'd aged 10 years. Jake, I'm sorry, but the recommendation is clear. Has to be retired from active duty effective immediately. Retired, Jake felt relief flood through him. That wasn't so bad. Was 8 years old anyway, close to retirement age for a working dog. He could take home, let him live out his years in peace. And evaluated for behavioral unpredictability, added. Given the severity of the incident and the potential liability, the department behavioral specialist will assess whether poses a public safety risk. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, because that's exactly what they were. You're talking about putting him down, Jake said, his voice hollow. You're talking about euthanizing a dog who saved a child's life. No one answered. The silence was answer enough. The news broke like wildfire. By that evening, police department recommends for Hero Dog was trending nationwide. The story had everything: injustice, a sympathetic victim, institutional bureaucracy crushing individual heroism. It was the kind of story that made people furious. Maria was cooking dinner when she saw the notification on her phone. She read the headline 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. Then she called at work, her voice shaking. They're going to kill the dog who saved Emma. They're going to kill him. That night Maria couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the moment had launched himself at. That dog hadn't hesitated. He'd seen a child in danger and he'd acted. And now, because he'd acted, because he'd been 2 seconds too committed to saving Emma, they were going to take his life. She got out of bed, walked to Emma's room, and watched her daughter sleep peacefully, safely, alive because of a dog who was now condemned. The injustice of it burned in her chest like acid. By sunrise, Maria had made a decision. She called every local news station. She posted on every social media platform she had. She wrote an open letter to the police chief, the mayor, the city council, anyone who would listen. Saved my daughter's life. He protected her when no one else could, and now we're going to kill him because he was too brave, because he held on 2 extra seconds to make absolutely sure my baby was safe. I won't stand for it. I won't be silent. If this community has any sense of justice, any sense of gratitude, any sense of what's right, we'll fight for the way he fought for Emma. She posted it at 6:47 a.m. By 9:00 a.m., it had been shared 40,000 times. By noon, protesters had gathered outside the police station with signs reading "Save" and "Heroes don't deserve death sentences." By evening, a petition to spare's life had collected 50,000 signatures. The story had become a movement, and Maria, a nurse who'd never been politically active, who'd never organized anything bigger than a birthday party, found herself at the center of a battle that would determine whether justice could triumph over bureaucracy, whether doing the right thing still mattered in a world governed by protocols and liability concerns. The fight for life had begun, and an entire community was ready to go to war for a German shepherd who'd done nothing but his job, and done it perfectly. David had been practicing law for 15 years, specializing in civil rights cases and what he called injustice litigation cases, where the system had failed someone who deserved better. He defended wrongly accused immigrants, fought for disability rights, and taken on corporations that exploited workers. But he'd never represented a dog before. The email from Maria arrived in his inbox on a Tuesday morning with the subject line, "Please help us save a hero." Almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but something made him click. He read Maria's story, every word of it, and by the time he finished, he was reaching for his phone. "Mrs., this is David. I just read your email about I'd like to help." Maria's voice cracked with relief on the other end. "You will, really, because I've called 12 lawyers and they all said you can't take a dog to court," finished for her. "They're not wrong, technically, but there are precedents for challenging administrative decisions about service animals. It's not a criminal trial, it's an administrative hearing, and I think we have a case." That conversation, 3 weeks before the hearing, set everything in motion. Worked Pro, driven by something he couldn't quite name. Maybe it was the injustice of it. Maybe it was the look in Emma's eyes in the photos Maria had sent, pure innocence saved by pure loyalty. Maybe it was because he'd grown up with a German shepherd named Max who'd been his best friend through a difficult childhood. Whatever the reason, David threw himself into defense with the passion of a man fighting for his own family. The hearing was scheduled for Judge's courtroom, a venue knew well. Had a reputation for being tough but fair, a stickler for procedure but not heartless. If they were going to get exonerated anywhere, this was their best shot. The prosecution, if it could be called that, was led by the police department's legal team. Their argument was straightforward. Protocol existed for everyone's safety. Had violated that protocol. Regardless of the outcome, the violation itself demonstrated unpredictability. Unpredictable K-9 units were liability risks, therefore had to be euthanized. It was cold, logical, and devastatingly simple. Strategy was more complex. He needed to prove that hadn't violated protocol, he'd exceeded it for a justifiable reason. The difference was crucial. Violation suggested malfunction. Exceeding suggested intelligence, judgment, heroism. The first day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Judge had reluctantly agreed to allow cameras, understanding that this case had become something bigger than a simple administrative review. The nation was watching. Began by calling Officer Jake to the stand. Jake wore his dress uniform, every medal earned over 12 years of service displayed on his chest. He looked nervous. Cops usually did in courtrooms when they weren't there to testify against criminals, but his voice was steady. "Officer, how long have you worked with?" asked. 8 years, sir, since he was 2 years old. And in those 8 years, has ever acted inappropriately? Never, not once. Walked to his table and picked up a thick binder. "Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence complete service record. 217 successful operations, 15 missing children found, all returned safely, 43 drug busts resulting in arrests, 0 complaints of excessive force prior to the incident in question." He let that sink in, making eye contact with Judge. 0 complaints in 8 years of active duty. The department's attorney, a stern woman named, objected. "The defendant's past record doesn't negate the violation in question. It establishes pattern of behavior," countered. "If had a history of aggression, that would be relevant. His history of perfect conduct is equally relevant." Judge nodded. "Overruled. The record will be entered as evidence. Continue, Mr." Turned back to, "Tell me about the night of April 3rd. What did you see when you arrived at the home?" Jake took a breath, and for the next 20 minutes he described the scene in detail. The shattered window, the terrified parents, the man with the knife and the tiny girl in his arms. His voice caught when he described Emma's face, the pure terror in a 3-year-old's eyes. "I knew I couldn't take a shot," Jake said. "Was using Emma as a shield. Any move I made could have resulted in that knife." He stopped, composed himself. "Assessed the threat faster than I did. When stumbled and that knife came up, moved." "Did you give the release command?" "Yes, sir, immediately upon engagement." "And released?" Jake's jaw tightened. "Within 4 seconds, 2 seconds longer than ideal protocol." "Why do you think held on those extra 2 seconds?" Stood, objection, calls for speculation about animal behavior. Smiled slightly. "I'll rephrase. Officer, based on your 8 years working with, your extensive K-9 training, and your experience in high-stress situations, what is your professional assessment of why delayed release?" Jake looked directly at Judge. Because he was making absolutely certain that couldn't hurt Emma, held until the knife was on the ground and was fully disabled. He did exactly what any good officer would do. He made sure the threat was neutralized before releasing. The difference is a dog. He can't explain his reasoning, but I know my partner. He wasn't being aggressive. He was being thorough. The courtroom was silent, even seemed momentarily affected by the testimony. Called his next witness, Dr. Foster, one of the country's leading experts in canine behavior and psychology. She'd worked with military dogs, police K-9 units, and service animals for 20 years. Her credentials took 5 minutes to read into the record. Dr. Foster's testimony was technical but powerful. She explained how police dogs are trained to assess threats, how they process information faster than humans in crisis situations, how the delay in release was actually sophisticated threat assessment. "In my professional opinion," Dr. Foster stated, looking directly at the judge, "this behavior demonstrates exactly what we want in a K-9 unit: intelligence, discrimination, and commitment to protecting human life. A dog that releases instantly, regardless of whether the threat is neutralized, is actually more dangerous than one who ensures the situation is safe before disengaging." Cross-examined aggressively. "Dr. Foster, isn't it true that unpredictability in K-9 behavior is a primary concern in law enforcement?" "Yes, unpredictability is a concern, but what demonstrated wasn't unpredictability, it was adaptability. There's a crucial difference. A difference that resulted in permanent injury to Mr. Dr. Foster didn't flinch. Mr. was holding a 3-year-old child with a knife. The injury he sustained was proportionate to the threat he posed. The second day of testimony featured medical experts discussing injuries. The prosecution made them sound catastrophic: permanent nerve damage, reduced mobility, chronic pain. They showed photographs that made spectators gasp. Knew this was the emotional core of the department's case. Regardless of heroism, this level of injury suggested excessive force. But had his own medical expert, Dr. James Martinez, an emergency room physician who treated hundreds of dog bite cases. Dr. Martinez, you've reviewed the medical reports on Mr.'s injuries. Are they consistent with a trained police dog engaging a threat? Absolutely. In fact, I'd say they're on the lower end of what I'd expect. His bite was controlled, focused on the arm holding the weapon. A truly vicious attack would have resulted in facial trauma, multiple bite locations, and significantly worse damage. Then called character witnesses, people whose lives had touched. Mrs. Henderson, the elderly woman whose grandson had found when he wandered away from a picnic, wept as she described the moment had led officers to the boy, who'd fallen into a ravine and was unconscious. Michael, no relation to the attorney, was now 19, a college freshman studying criminal justice. He about the day had taken down an armed dealer during a bust gone wrong, saving Michael's life when he'd been an innocent bystander caught in crossfire. That dog didn't hesitate, Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. He put himself between me and a gun. He's not dangerous. He's a protector. By the third day, the courtroom had become a referendum on something bigger than one dog's fate. It was about whether we value action over protocol, whether heroism counted when it didn't follow the rules perfectly, whether doing the right thing mattered more than doing the procedure correctly. The prosecution rested its case with a simple statement from, "We're not questioning intent or his history. We're questioning whether an animal that exceeded force parameters once can be trusted not to do so again." The answer, based on departmental safety protocols and liability concerns, is no. Stood for his closing argument on day 3, knowing this was his last chance. He walked to the center of the courtroom, looking at each face in the gallery before turning to Judge. Your Honor, this case asks us to decide between two types of justice. There's justice by the letter, the kind that counts seconds and measures bite force and calculates liability. And then there's justice by spirit, the kind that asks what's right, what's fair, what we owe to those who protect us. He paused, letting the words settle. Isn't on trial for being aggressive. He's on trial for being too good at his job, for caring too much about a child's safety, for those 2 extra seconds that made absolutely certain Emma would go home to her parents instead of ending up on a coroner's table. That's what we're here to decide. Should die because he was too committed to saving a life. The courtroom was silent, except for quiet sniffles from the gallery. Judge closed her folder. Thank you, mister. I'll take all testimony under advisement. She paused, her eyes moving to where Maria sat with Emma. But before I adjourn, I want to hear from one more witness. Every head turned. I want to hear from Emma. The announcement landed like a thunderclap in the silent courtroom. Judge's words, "I want to hear from Emma," seemed to echo off the high ceilings and wooden panels, reverberating through every person present. Maria's hand flew to her mouth. Eyes went wide with surprise and concern. David, despite his 15 years of courtroom experience, found himself momentarily speechless. Your Honor, finally managed, rising from his seat, Emma is only 3 years old. She's never before. The trauma of that night. Judge raised her hand gently. I understand your concerns, mister, but this case is ultimately about what happened to Emma and whether his actions were justified in protecting her. I believe Emma has a right to be heard, even if her testimony is limited. She looked toward Maria with surprising softness. Mrs., I won't force this, but if Emma is willing and you give permission, I'd like to hear what she has to say. Maria looked down at her daughter, who was coloring in a Disney princess book, completely oblivious to the fact that everyone was now staring at her. Emma had dressed herself that morning, something she insisted on doing lately, choosing her favorite yellow dress with the white flowers because, as she told her mother, it's happy and likes happy. "Emma, honey," Maria whispered, kneeling beside her daughter's seat. "The nice judge lady wants to ask you some questions about. Would that be okay?" Emma looked up from her coloring book, a purple crayon still clutched in her small fist. "Can I tell her about how he's soft and nice?" Maria's eyes filled with tears. "Yes, baby, you can tell her anything you want." Squeezed Maria's shoulder as she helped Emma down from her seat. The little girl's Mary Jane shoes made soft clicking sounds on the marble floor as she walked toward the front of the courtroom. She carried Mr. Hoppy with her. The stuffed rabbit hadn't left her side since that terrible night, and she walked with the unself-conscious confidence that only very young children possess. The bailiff, a grandfather of 4, smiled gently and brought out a special step stool kept for occasions when children needed to be seen. He placed it carefully behind the witness stand, then helped Emma climb up. Even with the stool, Emma was barely visible over the massive wooden podium. Her head, with its dark curls pulled back in a pink bow, just peeked over the edge. Judge came down from her elevated bench, an unprecedented move that made the court reporter's fingers pause over her stenography machine. The judge pulled a chair beside the witness stand and sat at Emma's level, something she'd never done in 20 years on the bench. "Hello, Emma," Judge said softly. "My name is, but you can call me Judge Pat if that's easier. Is that okay?" Emma nodded, hugging Mr. Hoppy closer. She seemed very small in that big courtroom, surrounded by adults in serious clothes, with cameras pointed at her and strangers filling every seat. "Emma, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I want you to answer as best as you can. But if you don't understand something, or if you don't want to answer, that's okay too. Can you do that for me?" "Yes," Emma said in a voice so quiet the microphones barely caught it. "Good. Now, Emma, do you remember the night when the bad man came to your house?" Emma's face changed immediately. Her smile disappeared. Her grip on Mr. Hoppy tightened until her knuckles turned white. For a moment, Maria started to stand, ready to pull her daughter away from this questioning, ready to protect her from reliving that trauma. But's hand on her arm stopped her. "The scary man," Emma whispered. "He was loud." "I know he was scary," Judge said gently. "You're very brave for talking about it. Do you remember what happened?" Emma nodded slowly. He grabbed me. It hurt. His hands were rough and he smelled bad and I wanted Mama, but he wouldn't let me go." Her voice was trembling now, the words coming faster, and there was something shiny. "The knife," the judge said quietly. "You saw the knife." "I didn't know what it was, but it was scary and I cried and wanted Mama." Emma's voice broke, tears beginning to slide down her cheeks. The courtroom was absolutely silent. Reporters' pens had stopped moving. Camera operators held their positions, but several were visibly crying behind their equipment. Even the prosecution attorney who'd argued so forcefully for protocol had to look away, her professional composure cracking. "You're doing great, Emma," Judge encouraged, though her own eyes were suspiciously bright. "Now this is the important part. Do you remember the dog?" At the mention of his name, Emma's entire demeanor changed. The fear that had clouded her face lifted like morning fog. Her eyes brightened. A smile, small but genuine, appeared on her tear-stained face. She said, her voice suddenly stronger. "Came and he was so fast and so big and he made a loud sound and then..." She paused, her 3-year-old mind trying to piece together the chaotic sequence of events. "And then I was on the grass and it was wet and Mama was there." "Did hurt you?" "No," Emma said emphatically, shaking her head so vigorously her bow came loose. "Is nice, he's a good boy." "But he did bite the bad man, didn't he?" Emma considered this, her face scrunched in concentration. He got the bad man's arm, the one with the scary shiny thing, made him let go." Judge leaned forward slightly. Emma, were you scared of? No, Emma said simply, as if this was the most obvious thing in the world. Saved me. Mama said so, is my friend. Your friend, the judge repeated softly. Uh-huh, and friends protect each other. That's what Mama says. Protected me, so now. Emma's little face crumpled again, fresh tears flowing. So now I want to protect, but everyone keeps saying he did something bad and he didn't. He saved me. He's good. The courtroom erupted in a wave of emotion. People were openly crying now. Maria had her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face, had his arm around his wife, his own eyes wet. David had to turn away for a moment, overcome. Even Judge had to pause, removing her glasses to wipe her eyes. Emma, thank you for being so brave and telling me about that night. I have one more question and then you can go back to your mama. Okay. Emma nodded, sniffling. If you could see right now, what would you say to him? Emma didn't hesitate. She looked directly at Judge with the absolute certainty that only a child can possess. I would say good boy because that's what you say to good dogs. And I would give him a hug because he protected me and now he must be scared too, and everyone needs hugs when they're scared. The judge nodded slowly, then did something unprecedented. She stood up and offered Emma her hand. Thank you, Emma. You've helped me very much. You can go back to your mama now. As Emma climbed down from the witness stand, clutching Mr. Hoppy, she turned back to the judge. Judge Pat, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Are you going to help? Because he's really good and I miss him and I want to tell him he's a good boy. Judge's professional mask finally cracked completely. A single tear rolled down her cheek as she looked at this tiny, brave girl who'd just about the worst night of her young life. Not to seek justice for herself, but to save the dog who'd saved her. I'm going to try my very best, Emma, I promise. Emma smiled, a full, genuine 3-year-old smile, and ran back to her mother's arms. Maria scooped her up, holding her daughter tightly, kissing her hair, whispering, You were so brave, so brave. David remained standing, knowing this was his moment. Your Honor, the defense has one more request. An unusual one, but given Emma's testimony about wanting to tell him he's a good boy. He paused, letting the weight of what he was about to suggest settle. We request that be brought into this courtroom. Let Emma tell him herself. Let this court see the interaction between a child and the dog who saved her. Let everyone here witness whether is the threat the department claims, or the hero this little girl knows him to be. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, shot to her feet. Your Honor, that's absolutely. But Judge was already considering it, her mind visibly working through the implications, the protocols, the unprecedented nature of such a request. She looked at Emma, still in her mother's arms, looking hopeful and innocent and heartbreakingly small. She looked at the camera operators, at the packed gallery, at the reporters who would broadcast whatever decision she made to millions of people. And she looked at the case files in front of her, at 8 years of perfect service, at one moment of exceeding protocol to save a life, at a system that demanded death for a hero because rules were rules. Judge Gavel rose. Mister, your request is highly irregular. There are safety concerns, protocol issues, liability considerations. She paused, and something shifted in her expression, something human breaking through the judicial reserve. But this case has been irregular from the start, and if we're going to decide's fate, perhaps we should let his actions speak for themselves. The gavel struck wood with a decisive crack. Bailiff, have K9 brought to this courtroom. Maximum security protocols. 2 handlers, muzzled, but bring him here. The courtroom exploded in sound, gasps, murmurs, even some applause that the bailiff quickly shushed. David felt his heart racing. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. Emma, not fully understanding what was happening but hearing his name, wiggled out of her mother's arms and stood on her chair, straining to see the door where would enter. Is coming, she asked excitedly. Is he really coming, Mama? Maria could barely speak through her tears. Yes, baby, coming. And in a kennel across town, a German shepherd with a graying muzzle and wise eyes was being fitted with a muzzle and lead, about to walk into a courtroom where his fate, and perhaps the meaning of justice itself, would be decided. Time seemed to stretch impossibly thin in the 23 minutes it took for to arrive at the courthouse. Every second felt like an hour. The courtroom, which had been buzzing with conversation after Judge's unprecedented decision, gradually fell into an anticipatory silence so profound that people could hear their own heartbeats. Emma stood on her chair, gripping the back of it with both hands, her whole body angled toward the side door through which would enter. She'd asked her mother 14 times if was really coming, if this was real, if she'd actually get to see him. Each time, Maria had assured her yes, though Maria herself could barely believe what was happening. David sat at the defense table, his hands clasped so tightly his fingers ached. This was either the most brilliant strategic move of his career or the most catastrophic. Everything hinged on the next few minutes. If showed any sign of aggression, any hint of unpredictability, the case was lost. Not just lost, demolished. But if proved himself to be exactly what believed he was, a trained, controlled, gentle protector, they might actually win this. Officer Jake stood near the back of the courtroom, having been called down when the request was approved. He'd spoken to the handlers who would bring in, given them explicit instructions, assured them that would behave. But Jake's stomach was twisted in knots. He knew his partner better than anyone, but courtrooms were strange environments, full of unknown people and unpredictable energy. Would sense the tension. Would he react poorly to the crowd? The prosecution attorney sat rigidly at her table, her expression unreadable. She'd objected strenuously to this circus, as she'd called it, but Judge had overruled her. Now was trapped in a situation where she had to hope a dog would somehow prove her point, that he was dangerous, unpredictable. The irony wasn't lost on her. Hopping a dog would act aggressively toward a child to win a legal argument felt grotesque, even to her professionally detached mind. The cameras were all positioned and ready. This moment would be broadcast live to millions. News anchors across the country had interrupted regular programming with breaking news. Hero dog enters courtroom banners. Social media was exploding with speculation and anticipation. The hashtag in court was trending worldwide. Then the side door opened. The collective intake of breath was audible. 2 handlers entered first, both experienced K-9 officers in full uniform, both gripping thick leather leads attached to a reinforced harness. Between them walked. The German shepherd looked smaller somehow than in the photos and videos that had circulated. At 8 years old, he was past his prime, with gray around his muzzle and above his eyes. His gait had the slight stiffness of aging joints. He wore a standard muzzle, securely fastened, and his ears were alert but not aggressive, scanning the room, processing this strange environment. But what struck everyone most was his eyes. Intelligent, focused, aware. These weren't the eyes of a vicious animal. These were the eyes of a professional, a protector who'd seen things and survived them, who'd served and saved and now found himself in a place that made no sense to his canine understanding. His head swiveled as he took in the courtroom. His nostrils flared, processing hundreds of scents. His tail hung neutral, not tucked in fear, not raised in aggression, just carefully neutral, waiting. Then saw Emma. The change was instantaneous and unmistakable. His ears perked forward. His tail began to wag, not the wild, uncontrolled wag of an undisciplined pet, but a steady, rhythmic motion that spoke of recognition and joy. A sound escaped him, half whimper, half whine, a vocalization that anyone who'd ever owned a dog would recognize as pure happiness. Emma shrieked, her small voice piercing the silence. She started to climb down from her chair but caught her. "Wait," he said gently, though his own eyes were fixed on the dog. "Wait for the judge to say it's okay." His entire body was trembling now. every muscle quivering with the desire to go to Emma. But his training held. Despite every instinct screaming at him to run to the little girl he'd saved, he stayed with his handlers, obeying their commands even as his eyes never left Emma's face. Judge stood slowly, her eyes moving between the dog and the child. "Officers, please bring forward slowly. Keep him controlled, but let's see what happens." The handlers moved cautiously, step by careful step, bringing down the center aisle of the courtroom. Every eye followed their progress. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail. His claws clicked against the marble floor. His breathing was audible through the muzzle, quick, excited, but not aggressive. As they approached the front where Emma stood with her parents, something remarkable happened. Without any command from his handlers, without any prompting, did something that made Evan's professional skepticism waver. He dropped into a submissive position. This powerful police dog, trained to take down criminals, trained to be fierce when necessary, made himself as small and unthreatening as possible. He lowered his entire body to the floor, his belly touching the ground, his head down, the canine equivalent of saying, "I am not a threat. I mean no harm." "My God," one of the handlers whispered, "I've never seen him do that." Jake, watching from the back, felt tears spring to his eyes. "That's because he knows," Jake said quietly to no one in particular. "He knows she's special. He knows she's the one he saved." Judge looked at David. "Mister, I'm going to allow supervised contact, but the moment I see anything concerning." "Understood, Your Honor," said quickly. Nodded to the handlers, who brought closer. They stopped about 6 feet from where Emma stood on her chair, still maintaining control of the leads. "Emma," Judge said gently, "you can come down now, but move slowly, okay? Nice and calm." Maria helped Emma down, her hands shaking. Stood close, ready to intervene if necessary. But something in his posture and his eyes told them intervention wouldn't be needed. Emma took 3 small steps toward. She clutched Mr. Hoppy in one hand, but the other reached forward tentatively. She wasn't scared. There wasn't an ounce of fear in her face, but she moved with the careful gentleness that children sometimes show when approaching something precious. "Hi," she whispered. His tail wagged harder, his whole back end moving now. That whimper came again, more insistent. He strained slightly forward, but when the handlers tightened their grip, he immediately stopped, respecting their control even as every fiber of his being wanted to reach this little girl. Emma took another step. Now she was within arm's reach. The courtroom held its collective breath. This was it, the moment that would define everything. Emma looked up at Judge. "Can I pet him, please?" Hesitated only a second before nodding. "Yes, but gently." Emma's small hand extended, moving towards head. The handlers tensed, ready to pull back at any sign of trouble. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the moment from every angle. Emma's fingers touched the soft fur between his ears. Closed his eyes, leaning ever so slightly into her touch. A sound rumbled from his chest, not a growl but something else entirely. A sigh of contentment, of recognition, of love. "Good boy," Emma said softly, her voice carrying clearly in the silent courtroom. "You're such a good boy." At those words, good boy's transformation was complete. The feared police dog, the K-9 unit under investigation, the animal facing, became nothing more than a gentle soul basking in the approval of someone he loved. His tail wagged so hard now that his entire body moved with it. He pressed his nose against Emma's palm through the muzzle, as close as he could get to making contact. Emma leaned down, wrapping her small arms around his neck. The handlers started to intervene, but Jake, who'd moved closer, shook his head. "He's okay. Let her." And was more than okay. He remained perfectly still, perfectly gentle, letting this tiny human hug him, not moving a muscle that might disturb her embrace. "You saved me," Emma whispered into his fur, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "You were so brave. The bad man was scary, but you made him go away. You protected me." Then she pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes with the serious intensity only a child can muster. "Now I save you," she declared. "I protect you, because that's what friends do." The courtroom erupted. Not in chaos, but in emotion so powerful it couldn't be contained. People were openly weeping. Judge had removed her glasses, wiping her eyes, had turned away entirely, her shoulders shaking. The reporters were crying even as they frantically took notes. The camera operators were capturing everything while tears streamed down their faces. Maria had collapsed into her chair, sobbing into her hands. Stood behind her, one hand on her shoulder, the other covering his own mouth as tears ran down his face. David felt his throat tighten. In 15 years of practicing law, he'd never seen anything like this. This wasn't just about one dog anymore. This was about loyalty, about sacrifice, about the bonds between humans and the animals we trust with our lives. Jake walked forward slowly, kneeling beside Emma, and his partner looked at him, and Jake could swear he saw gratitude in those intelligent eyes. "Hey, buddy," Jake said softly, his voice breaking. "You did good, you did so good." Emma looked at Jake, then at the judge. "See," she said with the absolute certainty of a child who knows she's right, "is good. He's not mean, he loves me and I love him." Judge had to take several moments to compose herself. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you, Emma. Officers, you can take back now." "No," Emma cried out, clinging to. "Please, not yet, I just got him back." The judge's expression softened even further. "Just for a little while, sweetheart. I promise we'll be safe. But I need to think about everything I've seen today." Emma reluctantly released her grip, but not before pressing a kiss to the top of his head. "I'll see you soon, okay? You're going to come home, I know it." As the handlers began to lead away, the dog looked back at Emma, his eyes following her until the very last moment before the door closed behind him. After was led away, Judge sat motionless at her bench, staring at the space where the dog and the little girl had embraced. The courtroom remained in stunned silence, people still processing what they'd witnessed. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the entire room was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Finally, Judge spoke, her voice hoarse with emotion. "We'll take a 30-minute recess. I need time to consider everything I've heard and seen today." Her gavel came down softly, almost tentatively, as if she was reluctant to break the spell that had been cast. Those 30 minutes felt like 30 hours. Maria sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, Emma between them on a wooden bench that was far too large for her small frame. Emma swung her legs, humming a song from one of her cartoons, seemingly unaware of the magnitude of what had just happened. She'd hugged him. In her 3-year-old understanding of the world, that meant everything was going to be okay. But the adults knew better. Maria's hands wouldn't stop shaking, kept running his fingers through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since college. They'd done everything they could. Emma had proven himself gentle, but would it be enough? Or would protocol and liability and all those cold legal considerations win out over what their hearts, and everyone else's hearts, knew to be true? Down the hall, Officer Jake sat alone on a bench, his head in his hands. His wife had tried to comfort him, but he'd asked for a moment alone. 8 years. 8 years of partnership, of trust, of watching be the best at what he did. And now it all came down to whether a judge could see past departmental regulations to recognize heroism when it sat right in front of her. David paced in an empty conference room, his phone buzzing constantly with messages from reporters, colleagues, and even strangers who'd been watching the live broadcast. The legal community was divided. Some said he'd pulled off by bringing Emma face to face. Others said it was a risky gambit that might backfire, that emotional manipulation, however well-intentioned, wasn't how justice should work. But wasn't thinking about legal strategy anymore. He was thinking about his eyes, the way that dog had looked at Emma, the gentleness, the love. How could anyone argue that animal was dangerous? sat in another conference room, her carefully constructed professional demeanor finally cracking completely. She'd called her office, told them what had happened, and her supervisor had said, "Stay the course. Protocol is protocol." But had 3 dogs at home, rescues all of them. And she kept seeing submissive posture, kept hearing Emma's words, "Now I save you." For the first time in her legal career, wasn't sure she was on the right side. In the courtroom itself, reporters were frantically filing stories, updating their social media, capturing every angle of what was being called the most emotional courtroom scene in decades. The footage of Emma hugging had already been viewed 30 million times. Save was trending #1 worldwide. Everyone from celebrities to politicians was weighing in. But none of that mattered as much as what was happening in Judge's chambers. She sat at her desk, the case files spread before her. On one side, the departmental regulations, the liability concerns, the protocol violations. On the other side, 8 years of perfect service records, testimony from experts, character witnesses, and the image, burned into her mind forever, of a little girl and a dog who loved each other. Judge had been on the bench for 20 years. She'd presided over murder trials where she'd had to sentence people to life in prison. She'd handled custody cases where children were torn from parents. She'd made decisions that ruined lives and decisions that saved them, but never had a case felt quite like this. The law was supposed to be impartial, blind to emotion, concerned only with facts and precedent. But what was she supposed to do when the facts themselves were emotional? When the truth lived not in testimony transcripts, but in the way a dog had made himself small and gentle for a child? When justice seemed to demand something different than what protocol prescribed? She thought about her own childhood, about a collie named Rusty who'd been her best friend through her parents' divorce. She thought about her granddaughter, who was around Emma's age. She thought about all the times throughout history when doing the right thing had required breaking or bending rules that no longer served their intended purpose. Judge looked at the clock. 28 minutes had passed. It was time. She gathered her notes, straightened her robe, and walked back into the courtroom. The moment she appeared, the room fell silent again. Everyone found their seats. Emma climbed back up into her chair between her parents. Jake stood at attention near the back. David took his place at the defense table, his heart hammering. Returned to her seat, her expression unreadable. "Please be seated," Judge said, though her voice lacked its usual authoritative command. She seemed different somehow, more human, less judicial. She took her seat at the bench and looked out at the packed courtroom. "This case," she began slowly, choosing each word with care, "has challenged me in ways I never anticipated when I agreed to hear it. I've listened to expert testimony. I've reviewed service records. I've examined departmental protocols and liability considerations. I've heard from people whose lives were touched by K9. She paused, her eyes finding Emma's face. "And I've witnessed something I never thought I'd see in my courtroom. A display of pure, uncomplicated love between a child and the dog who saved her life." Maria squeezed hands so hard her knuckles turned white. "The question before me isn't really about whether violated protocol. The evidence is clear that he held on for approximately 2 seconds longer than ideal departmental parameters. The question is what that means, whether those 2 seconds represent a dangerous unpredictability that threatens public safety, or whether they represent something else entirely." Judge removed her glasses, looking directly at the empty collar and badge displayed on the defense table as evidence. "I've spent 30 minutes asking myself, what is the purpose of the law? Is it to serve protocols and procedures, or is it to serve justice? Is it to protect institutions from liability, or is it to protect people, especially children, from harm?" She leaned forward, her voice growing stronger. Every expert witnessed that behavior was consistent with a highly trained K9 making split-second threat assessments. Dr. Foster explained that so-called delay was actually sophisticated judgment, ensuring the threat was truly neutralized before releasing. officer to 8 years of perfect service. And we all saw with our own eyes how responded to Emma, with gentleness, with love, with the kind of protective instinct that we should celebrate, not condemn. David felt hope rising in his chest but forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't over yet. However, Judge continued, and the word fell like a hammer, I'm also aware of the prosecution's concerns. We live in a society governed by rules. Protocols exist for good reasons. If I rule that actions were acceptable, am I not essentially saying that K-9 units can make their own determinations about force parameters? Where does that lead? The hope that had been building in the courtroom began to deflate. I've struggled with this question for 30 minutes, and I'm going to be honest with everyone here. This is one of the hardest decisions I've ever had to make. Judge's voice wavered slightly. Because what I've realized is that sometimes the law asks us to do things that feel wrong, even when they're technically correct. And sometimes justice asks us to do things that feel right, even when they're technically questionable. She picked up her gavel, and the sound of wood on wood seemed impossibly loud. I've made my decision. Emma leaned forward in her chair, her small hands gripping the edge of the seat. Maria felt dizzy, held his breath. Jake closed his eyes, praying to whatever deity might be listening. But before I announce my ruling, Judge said, and every heart in the courtroom sank. Before, there was always a before, always one more twist, one more moment of agony. I want to say something directly to Emma. The judge looked at the little girl, and her expression softened completely. Emma, you came into this courtroom today and you were so brave. You talked about a scary night. You told us about, and then you did something that I will never forget as long as I live. Judge's voice broke slightly. You looked at me with those big eyes and you said that you wanted to protect because that's what friends do. You said that he saved you, and now you would save him. Emma nodded seriously, not fully understanding but knowing this was important. That's what changed my mind, Emma, not the expert testimony, not the service records, not even watching with you, though that was powerful. What changed my mind was a 3-year-old girl who understood something that we adults sometimes forget, that loyalty matters, that gratitude matters, that when someone risks everything to save you, you don't abandon them when they need you most. Judge straightened in her chair, her voice becoming formal again, though it still carried the weight of emotion. In the matter of K-9 unit, badge number 447, I find as follows. While K-9's engagement exceeded strict departmental timing parameters by approximately 2 seconds, the context of the situation, an armed suspect holding a 3-year-old hostage with a knife, justified those additional seconds. His actions were not unpredictable or aggressive. They were the result of superior training and judgment. David felt his chest tighten. Could this be? Furthermore, his behavior today in this courtroom demonstrated beyond any doubt that he is capable of gentleness, of discrimination, and of responding appropriately to different situations. An unpredictable, dangerous animal does not lower itself submissively in the presence of a child. A vicious dog does not show the kind of tenderness we all witnessed. The courtroom was so silent that people could hear their own heartbeats pounding. Therefore, I rule that K-9 is hereby cleared of all allegations of excessive force and dangerous unpredictability. The courtroom exploded before Judge could finish. People leaped to their feet, cheering, crying, embracing strangers. Maria burst into tears, pulling Emma into her arms, wrapped both of them in a bear hug, his shoulders shaking with sobs of relief. Judge's gavel struck the bench repeatedly, trying to restore order to the chaotic celebration erupting throughout her courtroom. Order! I need order! Her voice, usually so commanding, was nearly drowned out by the jubilant noise. Finally, after nearly a full minute of sustained banging, the crowd began to settle, though tears continued to flow and people clutched each other's hands in relief and joy. I'm not finished, Judge said, and a hush fell immediately. There was more. Of course there was more. Emma looked up at her mother, confused by the adult's sudden tension, not understanding that cleared of charges didn't necessarily mean safe forever. Judge's expression softened as she continued. Is cleared of all charges and allegations. However, given his age and the stress of these proceedings, I'm ordering that he be honorably retired from active K-9 duty, effective immediately. Jake felt his knees nearly buckle with relief. Retired, not dead, retired. Furthermore, the judge continued, looking directly at Jake, I'm ordering that K-9 be released to Officer Jake for permanent adoption and care. Officer has demonstrated 8 years of excellent partnership with, and I can think of no one better suited to provide him with the peaceful retirement he has earned. Jake couldn't hold it together anymore. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking as 8 months of stress, fear, and anguish finally released. His wife Sarah wrapped her arms around him, crying herself. Their son stood beside them, grinning through their own tears. But Judge wasn't done yet. Additionally, I'm making a recommendation to the Springfield Police Department and to the state legislature. The protocols governing K-9 use of force need to be revised to allow for contextual judgment. While standardized procedures are important, they must not be so rigid that they punish intelligent decision-making in life-or-death situations. This case has exposed a flaw in our system, one that values procedure over outcome, timing over results, protocol over lives saved. She looked at Police Chief, who sat in the gallery, his expression unreadable. Chief, I strongly urge your department to conduct a comprehensive review of K-9 engagement policies, and I'm forwarding my recommendation to the state capitol that Massachusetts establish new guidelines that other states might consider as a model. Chief nodded slowly. He'd come to the same conclusion himself over the past few days, watching this case unfold. Sometimes it took a crisis to reveal where systems were broken. Finally, Judge said, her voice growing gentle again as she looked at Emma, I want to address something that Emma said today. She told us that saved her and now she would save him. Emma, you did save him. Your courage in coming here, in telling your story, in showing us all what means to you that saved his life. Never forget that you're a hero too. Emma didn't fully understand all the big words, but she understood the important part. Can come home? She asked hopefully. Judge smiled, a genuine warm smile that transformed her entire face. Yes, sweetheart, can go home. The courtroom erupted again, and this time Judge let it happen. She struck her gavel one final time. This court is adjourned, she announced, and for the first time in months those words carried hope instead of dread. What happened in the minutes and hours after that ruling would be replayed on news stations around the world for weeks. David was mobbed by reporters, his phone ringing constantly with interview requests and congratulations from legal colleagues. He'd won the unwinnable case, set legal precedent, and restored faith in the justice system for millions of viewers. But wasn't thinking about his career. He was thinking about a dog getting a second chance at life and a little girl who would grow up knowing that speaking up for those you love matters. That was worth more than any professional accolade. Maria and were surrounded by supporters, neighbors, and even strangers who wanted to shake their hands, to tell them how inspired they were, to share their own stories of beloved pets. But they barely heard any of it. They were too busy holding Emma, kissing her hair, thanking whatever force in the universe had brought them through this nightmare intact. Quietly packed her briefcase, slipped out a side door, and went home to hug her own 3 rescued dogs a little. She'd write her report to the department, but she'd also include a personal note. Sometimes losing a case was actually winning something more important. Sometimes the law served justice by bending rather than breaking. The real celebration happened 2 days later at Officer Jake's home, a modest ranch-style house with a large fenced backyard. The department had expedited its release, and Jake had brought his partner home that very afternoon. Had spent his first hours of freedom exploring every corner of the house, relearning what it meant to be in a home rather than a kennel, to sleep on a soft bed rather than concrete, to receive affection freely rather than as a reward for work. When the family arrived at Jake's house that Saturday morning, Emma burst from the car before had even fully parked. She ran straight to the backyard gate, her yellow dress, the same one she'd worn to court, bright in the morning sunshine, was lying in the grass, enjoying the warmth of the sun on his graying fur. The moment he heard Emma's voice calling his name, he was on his feet, trotting to the gate with that distinctive happy gait that dogs have when greeting someone they love. Jake opened the gate and Emma flew through it, dropping to her knees as reached her. The dog immediately went into his submissive position, not out of fear, but out of gentleness. He knew she was small and precious and needed to be approached carefully. Emma threw her arms around his neck and his tail wagged so hard his entire back half swayed. He licked her face, making her giggle, and the sound of that laughter, pure, joyful, unafraid, was the sweetest sound any of the adults had ever heard. "I told you," Emma said too, looking into his eyes with complete seriousness. "I told you I'd save you. Friends protect friends." Maria stood with her arm around his waist, watching their daughter play with the dog who'd given her back to them. "We should do something special for him," Maria said quietly. "He gave us everything." Jake, standing beside them with Sarah and their sons, shook his head. "You've already given him everything he needs. He's got Emma, he's got his freedom, he's got a home. For a dog, that's the whole world." They stood there for over an hour, watching Emma and play. The little girl would throw a tennis ball and would fetch it with the enthusiasm of a puppy despite his aging joints. She'd run, and he'd chase her carefully, always aware of his size and strength relative to hers. She'd sit in the grass and he'd lie beside her, his head in her lap, content just to be near her. Neighbors began to arrive as word spread. People who'd supported his cause, who'd signed petitions, who'd stood outside the police station with signs. Someone brought a cake decorated with a dog bone and the words "Welcome home, hero." Someone else brought a new collar for a civilian collar, dark blue with silver tags that read, "Retired hero. If found, return to family." As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Emma lay in the grass with her head on side, using him as a pillow. The big dog remained perfectly still, his breathing steady and peaceful, occasionally licking Emma's hand when she reached up to pet him. "You know what's amazing?" David said quietly. He'd been invited to the celebration and stood with the group of adults watching the scene. 3 months ago, that dog was on death row. Now he's lying in the sun with the little girl he saved, living his best life. That's what justice looks like when we get it right. Officer looked at his partner, his friend, and felt a weight lift from his chest that he'd been carrying for 8 months. "He's got maybe 3 or 4 good years left," Jake said softly. "I'm going to make sure every single day of them is perfect." As the sun finally set and families began to leave, Emma gave one last long hug. "I have to go home now," she told him seriously. "But I'll come back tomorrow, okay? And the day after that, and every day, because you're my best friend." His tail wagged in response, as if he understood every word. The family drove home that night with Emma chattering the entire way about what they'd played, how soft his fur was, how his tail never stopped wagging when she was near. Maria and listened, their hearts full, knowing how close they'd come to losing not just but a piece of Emma's innocence and joy. In the weeks and months that followed, his case did exactly what Judge had hoped. Massachusetts passed the law legislation that reformed K-9 use of force policies to include contextual assessment and judgment factors. 12 other states introduced similar legislation. Police departments across the country revised their training protocols to emphasize intelligent decision-making alongside procedural compliance. Became something of a celebrity, though he remained blissfully unaware of his fame. He lived quietly with the family, enjoyed daily visits from Emma, and spent his retirement doing what all good dogs deserve: playing, resting, and being loved. Emma kept her promise. She visited every single day that she could. As she grew older, 4 years old, then 5, then starting kindergarten, was there. When she learned to ride a bike, trotted alongside her. When she had bad dreams, her parents would take her to visit, and somehow the big dog always made everything better. And every single time she saw him, no matter how many years passed, Emma would wrap her arms around his neck and whisper the same words. "Good boy. You're such a good boy." 3 years after the trial, passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the family with Emma sitting beside him, her hand on his side. He was 11 years old, a good, long life for a working dog. At his funeral, attended by hundreds of people whose lives he'd touched, Emma, now 6 years old, stood beside his memorial and said simply, "He was the best friend ever. He saved me and I saved him, and that's what love is." They buried with full police honors. A statue was erected outside the Springfield Police Department, a German shepherd in mid-stride, alert and protective, with a plaque reading, "K9, hero, partner, friend. He taught us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to let go." And in homes across America, in courtrooms and police departments, in the hearts of everyone who'd followed the story, his legacy lived on. A reminder that justice isn't just about following rules, but about recognizing courage when we see it, protecting those who protect us, and never forgetting that sometimes the greatest heroes walk on 4 legs and ask for nothing more than love in return.